Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we explore the stories of successful people, get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things, and dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and Jeff, welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
I'm honored to be here, Andrew. I've never done something like this, so we'll have a good conversation about Desmond Doss and the foundation that I'm kind of championing right now.
Yeah, and about you. We'll have a lot of fun. So you mentioned Desmond Doss Foundation. You're the acting president, and I want to talk a lot about that, and especially the principles that Desmond Doss espoused. First of all, who Desmond Doss was, etc. But before we do that, tell us about your journey. You're a registered nurse. You've been a production executive in Hollywood. You're an independent producer now. You've had a really exciting story. Take us back. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And briefly tell us how you got to where you are today.
Well, I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Are you a Lions fan?
You bet I am.
Jeff, I'm a Lions fan too. You know what? So Jeff and I met in an event at Las Vegas, and maybe we discussed that, but this is our year.
It sure is. 1957, the last time they were champions, 10 years before the Super Bowl even was around. We've had our heart broken how many times? I think the Lions hold the record for the most NFL games lost in the last 5 to 7 seconds with 64-foot field goals against them, etc.
I think you're right. I've been waiting since I was 4 years old for them to win a playoff game prior to this past Sunday. So we've obviously never hosted, we're getting a little off track, but we had never hosted a playoff in Ford Field because before it was the Silver Dome. And so I'm just so excited for this Sunday. We're going to be playing the Bucs. And if we could just eke out one more win, we're going to the NFC Championship.
Pretty exciting.
It
well,
is.
my dad,
Detroit, Michigan.
My dad was an 8th generation plasterer from Italy. My grandfather had his own business, but in the late 60s, with all of the civil uprising, and being a plasterer in cold weather, my dad worked 3 to 4 months a year. So he moved my sister and I have 2 older brothers that lived in. One brother that still lives in Detroit. My other eldest brother passed away a couple of years ago, who was actually a medic during the Vietnam War, kind of in the footsteps of Desmond Doss that we'll talk about later. He was a non-combatant medic. But my parents moved us to upstate New York when I was 13. I went to a private boarding academy where actually my parents were faculty. My mom was the food service director, and my dad ran the industries where students could work to help pay off their tuition.
What brought them to upstate New York?
Well, a principal who was in inner city Detroit moved there to be the principal at Union Springs Academy, and he called my parents to come and work there. And as I recall, just the uprising of the 60s and all that was going on across our country, the fires in downtown Detroit. Thank God it's coming back finally. I still have a niece that lives there, my other brother. But they moved us to upstate New York, and when we graduated from academy, where I met my beautiful bride, she had her 70th birthday yesterday. Talk about getting off track. We met in our junior year, dated. So my wife and I graduated from Atlantic Union College in nursing. And as I say, why I'm probably so sane is she's a psychiatric nurse. And I started in orthopedics and then transitioned within 6 months to emergency and trauma. Did that for 6 years, went back and got my business degree through that time, and transitioned into the business side of healthcare, recruiting. I was a headhunter for 7 or 8 years, getting allied health and nursing personnel for a large medical center in Orlando, Florida, called Florida Hospital. And then I had a serious automobile accident when I was 31 and didn't work for 3.5 years, totally rehabbed. That's a whole different story. I kind of choreographed the extrication from the automobile and immediately knew, oh my goodness, no, not my back. But took me 3.5 years to rehab, got back into the workplace, and was here in California at Glendale Adventist Medical Center when I was asked to help with business development and recruitment of physicians. So I did that for 2 years for them, and then was courted back to Orlando, Florida for the Adventist Healthcare System to be the director of sales and business development. When managed care was really taking its formation with, senior citizen programs for Medicare and Medicaid and cost shifting. Don't want to bore you with healthcare. We still have a challenge in our world today. But with that background, I worked for Fortis Health for 2 years and had 11 states under my purview because I understood the healthcare delivery system and negotiated contracts on behalf of providers with Fortis Health and John Alden Insurance Company. When my father-in-law passed away in 1999, I said to my wife, it's time to go back to California and take care of your mother. So we moved to California, and I was in Nebraska when my cell phone, which was one of those big Motorola brick phones at the time, and a gentleman by the name of Gabe Videla called and said, I hear you're coming back to California. What are you going to do? I said, well, I'm not going to work for 6 months. I'm really, in a position where I can just redirect, take care of my mother-in-law. He says, well, that's not going to happen. You're going to come work for me as my executive assistant at Special Effects Unlimited, which at the time was the largest mechanical special effects house in Hollywood, blowing up buildings, doing rain, snow. Gabe Videla was the president, and he's one of those power brokers behind the scenes that negotiated special effects men, the mechanical, not the CGI. And he's responsible for about, I think it's well over 50 nominations that his men have been for mechanical effects. And I think there's 42 guys that actually hold that statue because of all the different major motion pictures that he worked. So that was my background and introduction to the entertainment industry. I guess you could say I learned my chops at Special Effects Unlimited.
So you moved to California to help Terrell's mom. How did Gabe know you?
He was actually the head deacon at a church in Thousand Oaks where my brother-in-law was a pastor. And when he learned from my brother-in-law that we were moving back, he gave me a call. This was like 1999. We had met each other briefly in 1989, and he'd actually called and said, I'd like you to consider coming and working for me. But that's when I was working in managed care and business development for Glendale Adventist Medical Center.
So you had no production experience?
Zero. but business acumen. And it's really about just applying, the business principles and learning how to do budgets for a motion picture. And the special effects department is where I learned that from.
When did you first meet Desmond Doss?
I was 9 years old. I was a little boy in Lansing, Michigan. There was a program called the Medical Cadet Corps, and it was for young men who were going to be drafted into the Army, and it was a 6 weeks summer course to learn how to do first aid and intervention of battlefield injuries. And Desmond started the Desmond Doss Medical Cadet Corps as one of his passions to help youth be prepared if they were called up for service. And my brother, Joseph, went through that program at the academy there in the summertime. And there was a big pageantry put on at a summer camp meeting where they had all these medical cadet individuals, marching, showing and then giving demonstrations. Oddly enough, Andrew, I didn't know at the time, but there was another gentleman who was actually assisting him, and his name was Tate Zitkowski, who was actually a non-combatant medic, a contemporary of Desmond, and he became my father-in-law. He was in Leyte and Guam, and Desmond was in Guam, Leyte, the Philippines, and then on to Okinawa. But oddly enough, I didn't know it at the time, but here I am at the age of 50. This gentleman by the name of Terry Benedict walked into the special effects office wanting some help with the documentary film he was doing on Desmond.
Opportunity and coincidences are very interesting, strange things. Tell me about, for our audience, our listeners, viewers who don't know who Desmond Doss is. Give us his background.
Desmond Doss was a World War II combat medic. He received the Medal of Honor for his heroism that was recognized during the Battle of Okinawa, which was one of the fiercest battles of World War II, even more fierce than our landings on D-Day in Europe. And in May of 1945, the company that he was, the Liberty Company that he was with, they had been repelled 3 or 4 times off the escarpment, and he stayed up on that escarpment and dragged over 75 men to the edge of the cliff and lowered them down to safety. And that's what he was really recognized for. But he had actually demonstrated his courage in, like I mentioned before, in Guam and Leyte. He received two Bronze Stars and 3 Purple Hearts as well, because he maybe the significant thing that I should say at this juncture, Desmond had a deferment. He did not have to go into the military service. But like many other young men, when Pearl Harbor, was enacted upon our country, he was working in a shipyard and he had a deferment, but he wanted to go and serve. And the story evolves that, he was tried pretty seriously to be drummed out of the Army because he was a non-combatant. He wouldn't carry a gun. And as the story goes, he had some significant things happen in his childhood that he would not touch a gun. And so even in the service against, being court-martialed and thrown out of the Army, he stood by his convictions and would do it. And ultimately, a letter from the President Roosevelt and one of the generals said he can serve, he can be a combat medic. And the irony of it was he was in a rifle company. So just think about those guys. You're not going to protect me, but what Desmond demonstrated was he was going to serve just as much in saving lives while others were taking lives. It's really a profound, unbelievable story.
And his objection, as you indicated, wasn't to the weapons themselves. He had some poor experiences in his childhood, so he didn't have a problem that other people were protecting the country and using weapons. He just couldn't morally do so. Is that correct?
That's correct. Personally himself. I mean, he understood the complexity of war is a necessary evil that we live with. He just wanted to be a different cog in that machine.
You were the production executive for really one of the first movies made about Desmond Doss, The Conscientious Objector. Talk to me about that movie, being on the set, and then your premiere event night and what unfolded in 2004.
Well, Terry Benedict was the director who was given the opportunity to tell Desmond's story, who he also met as a young boy, and he was familiar with it. Terry graduated from Pepperdine University in film, and he was having some difficulties. Any production is challenged with finances, and so I was able to come in well into the filming that Terry had done and traveling, and Gabe Videla, who brought me into the industry, became the executive producer to relieve Terry from all of the administrative elements of doing the film so he could just concentrate on the creative aspect, interviewing, these soldiers that were actually from Desmond's company that had survived. So the documentary is actually talking heads. We have over 20 minutes of movie tone footage that is actually from that time period, intercut with these men's experiences. And Terry did a beautiful narrative over with and music. And we garnered over 23 awards on the film festival circuit. So I helped with some of the financial things towards the end and coordination of final interviews. And then the majority of my responsibility at that juncture, once we got that stabilized, was positioning it on the film festival circuit. And we received over 23 laurel wreaths on the film festival circuit, and positioning it in New York and LA for the number of days that you've got to play in a theater so you can have, Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science consideration for an Oscar. And we came that close, but we didn't, they only have 3 at the time. And it was an exciting period. But on the film festival circuit in San Jose, I think your question that you wanted me to cover was our premiere evening in San Jose at the CineQuest Film Festival. This was 2004, so here we are 20 years later. We're still championing and carrying forward Desmond's values to youth, which we'll get into later. But at San Jose, a gentleman by the name of Halfton Huffey was the co-founder and director of CineQuest. And at that time, there were only 860 film festivals worldwide because digital hadn't come on high. It was still film, 16 millimeter, and there were only 860 festivals. There's like over 3,000 worldwide today. So it was pretty special for our premiere evening. And Halfton, as I was positioning the film, they actually gave us our world premiere. And they did something they'd never done. They had it on closing night of the festival. Never had a documentary before. And he said, "Can you do something for me? Can you have Desmond here?" I said, "Yeah, we'll make that happen."
And that was a great honor and a very prestigious opportunity to be a documentary film on closing night of the world premiere.
That's correct. And at that time, CineQuest was the 13th largest film festival in the world of that 860. And they have what they call a Maverick Spirit Award that they give to an individual who goes against the grain of Hollywood and really contributes to the artistic and storytelling and authentic. And that year, they had actually given it to Arnold Schwarzenegger because of how he's gone against the grain. And of course, we know the success of his career. So on Sunday night, for this premiere, Halfton came to me. He says, "Jeffrey, we've got a problem." And I go, "Well, what's that?" And he says, "Will you follow me?" So I walked to the front of the theater. He cracked open the door, and there was a line of people all the way down the block and around the corner. And he goes, "We only have room for a little over 490 people, and we've got over 700 people in line. Can we have a second screening?" I said, "Absolutely." So over 250 people waited in line for 2.5 hours because there was a special thing that went on with a Q&A after the premiere. And that special thing that happened was at the end of the screening, there's this traditional clapping, and Halfton stood up. And I actually have this right here, if I can show it to you. Does that show well?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So that's from the premiere night, world premiere.
That's from the world premiere at CineQuest.
And that's Desmond Doss.
This is Desmond Doss in the very uniform that he was discharged wearing, his Medal of Honor. And what occurred, Andrew, was Halfton got up and said, "Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger is our recipient of the Maverick Spirit Award this year, but we have a real hero in the audience tonight." And with that, Desmond stood up, walked up on stage, and they handed him an identical award, Spirit Award. There was a standing ovation for over 9 minutes. The place was, it was a spine-tingling experience that evening. And that was the world premiere and the thrust. And we went to 7 other film festivals. And Desmond, he was in his 80s, and we tried to really protect, his strength. You saw that he was wearing a cochlear implant because he had
Mm-hmm.
difficulty. He had lost his hearing, but with modern technology, he was able to have his hearing somewhat restored. And we tried to protect his travel itinerary. So I pulled back, and we only went to 7 film festivals and 4 or 5 other special engagements. But that was the beginning of taking Desmond's story to the world with the documentary.
We've had thousands of veterans, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, that I think we all should be very, very thankful for, who have given their lives so that we can have freedom, so that we can have peace, so that we can have prosperity. Why do you think Desmond Doss's story and foundation resonated so much, such that so many people came to the premiere event when they found out he was going to be there?
Well, I'm not sure that the whole audience knew of his story. I think it was the way in which we respectfully presented the materials to the CineQuest Film Festival, and they have an unbelievable co-marketing and the interest of Desmond. So I actually think many of the people didn't know the depth of his story at the time. And from that, it has just been a groundswell for, the documentary was extremely successful. And as things go in Hollywood, Terry, had hoped to make. In fact, there's the poster behind me for the film festival that we had out there, where that's actually Desmond up on the escarpment. The last known photo from a photojournalist is Desmond up there on the escarpment.
That's an actual photo from World War II.
That's correct. And that we brought that in to the poster, and then you'll see at the very bottom, that's Desmond reflecting, looking out over the pond in his backyard with the going up to his memories of being there. That was the poster that we had at the festival. So I believe that helped capture people. What is this story about?
Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk about his principles. You guys are working on Edusodes of courage, conviction, integrity, humility, selflessness, faith, and patriotism. Again, I would say that there are a lot of veterans that exhibited that, but as you said, he stood against the grain, and he got a 9-minute standing ovation. When you had the opportunity to travel with Desmond for 2 years, what was that like?
Wow. Emotional for me on many, many occasions, because I had a number of uncles who served in World War II, and then, of course, my brother in Vietnam. Probably one of the most memorable trips that we had was actually going to Washington, D.C. For a big event there in Tacoma. It was a large Seventh-day Adventist church that Desmond was requested to come to. Holds like 1,200 people. So there was a special program in the evening where we showed like 17 minutes snips of the documentary, and then we had a Q&A. But the following day, I was able to, wasn't really difficult to do. You call up the Capitol and say, Desmond Doss, Medal of Honor recipient, I'd like to have a tour for the young gentleman. And, things just, they know who he is, and fell into place. So we were able to, he was in a wheelchair at the time, and he was on oxygen. But we were able to be escorted through the Capitol, and the Capitol Police, the congressmen, the senators, as we would walk through, just respectfully, not overshadowing, but respectfully thanking him for his service. That was a memorable moment where Desmond was the most humble man. It wasn't about him. And constantly, it was the God that he believed in that enabled him to do what he did during those horrific moments during battle on the battlefield. And then after the Capitol, we went directly over to the newly erected World War II Memorial. And they have some lovely pictures of Desmond, respectfully, where he's just touching his hand with, where it's engraved with Okinawa, and picture of him and his wife. So that was a memorable moment where people who were visiting the war memorial, you see people who know what that medal is that he's wearing, and they come up, and then others who are in awe and give that distance and respect. So those are indelible memories in my mind, and I could talk for hours on that, but I'm going to cut myself short there before I even maybe have a tear come down my eye again.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you listen, or just me listening to what you're saying, and you get chills, because I don't think we recognize. You watch all the World War II videos, World War I videos. War is, of course, very, very gruesome today still, but it was so different back then, and we lost so many men, and it was such a different state of play. And the heroism that Desmond and so many others exhibited, I think it's really hard, and I'm curious on your perspective with this, especially having gotten into the opportunity to talk with Desmond a lot. It's hard to really understand it or fathom it in the 21st century in 2024, because it seemed so distant, but it was so real for him when he was at that World War II memorial.
You articulated that really well, Andrew. I think, our present society with political correctness and all of the issues that are just constantly on the airwaves and streaming, it's hard for us to really filter what it was back then. I mean, look at the top journalist, Tom Brokaw, The Greatest Generation, and all the books that have been written, all the stories that have been told, that it's still hard for us to really understand what it was like that a whole nation rallied around, and record numbers of men going. I mean, we have a snippet of what happened to us with 9/11, but even that is now, 23 years ago, and it's hard for us to really understand when our values as a country and what we live by with, caring for others and having the freedoms that we have, it's difficult for us. I think maybe one other thought that I have is, Desmond just cared so much for people, and he had a passion for youth. And it wasn't just what he did during his military service, but post-military. Desmond was actually hospitalized for 5 years in our hospitals, good portion of it at Walter Reed, because he contracted tuberculosis, and he had a lung resection, massive amounts of antibiotics they put him on, which were new at that time, which fried his hearing. That's why he lost his hearing. And in 1988, Dr. Jung at Loma Linda University gave him that beautiful technology with a cochlear implant, so he could listen and hear. And so when you see that in the documentary, Desmond is talking in his own words, he's an elderly man, but you when he spoke, people listened, and he had a small, raspy little voice, not real strong. But one of the other experiences that I can relay, that when we'd get in the car to travel, after getting off the plane or getting ready to go, whichever engagement we were scheduled for, I'd always ask Desmond to pray. He would give this short little prayer: Lord, protect us from seen and unseen danger. And it just gives you this feeling of this man had a connection with the God that he believed in, a modern Daniel, if you will. And I asked him one day, I said, well, Desmond, we're very familiar with your story because of the way in which it's told in the documentary that, Lord, help me get one more. Lord, help me get one more. He was up there for 12 hours in in the darkness, with all this horrific fire around him. And I asked him, I said, is that one of the, he says, Jeffrey, I said, was that prayer, did you lift that prayer a lot, Desmond? And he goes, it was constantly on my lips. Lord, help me get one more and protect me from seen and unseen dangers. And with that, while the documentary was extremely impactful and powerful, a motion picture was made called Hacksaw Ridge. And, we can talk about that a little if you'd like, because that's really where the Edusodes come from. But I don't want to direct.
No, I mean, it's so Hacksaw Ridge, I'll tell our audience, it is rated R, and there's some very graphic war scenes, but I think some of those are really important for us in this day and age to understand really what Desmond and so many of his colleagues went through for our country. But of course, I just say that as a word of caution. It may not be suitable for children in spite of the important principles. But what you're doing with your Edusodes is taking those principles that Desmond espoused and that Hacksaw Ridge does a really good job of relaying through Desmond's experience, is those principles we just talked about. And again, I want courage, conviction, integrity, humility, selflessness, faith, and patriotism. You're working on an Edusode for each one of those. Why do you think why is that important in today's day and age, and why does it mean so much to you to do this?
Well, I'll start once again with Desmond. Youth was his love, and post-World War II, he was requested to come to many schools and colleges and universities to be a guest and, tell of his background. But it was really about imbuing these moral principles in youth so they would become the next generation of upright citizens. That was at his core for the last 60, 70 years. So if I was to give context, the Desmond Doss Foundation became a 501c3 in 2018 to try to perpetuate, Desmond's principles to our present society and carry that forward. You think, well, why did it take so long? Let me backpedal for a moment. The documentary was successful in 2004, and the feature film Hacksaw Ridge didn't release until 2016. And that's the way it is in Hollywood. Things go on a roller coaster ride. When is the timing right for another, war film? The many successes that other filmmakers have had, but it's, Oliver Stone and Clint Eastwood, the timing of their films. Well, when are you going to bring out Hacksaw Ridge? Bill Mechanic obtained the story rights, very successful producer in Hollywood. He was actually an executive at Fox that greenlit pictures. And when he left Fox and became an independent producer on his own, even with his connectivity, it took 12 years to get Hacksaw Ridge made and into the marketplace. It garnered 6 Academy Award nominations and received two Oscars for sound mix and sound design, which goes right to your caution. The battle footage is intense, but Mel Gibson did not want to sanitize to the point. He wanted to have the visceralness and the ugliness of what our men really went through. So the founder and the president of the Desmond Doss Foundation is a gentleman by the name of Colonel Knapp. He was a medical officer during, the 80s and 90s, and knew Desmond's story extremely well. And there was a Desmond Doss Council, which was a group of men out of Georgia that were overseeing Desmond's story rights. And Desmond asked for help because he was getting old. And so Charles was integral in that. And once the 2 films were done and successful, they moved forward and created the foundation. So what is the core of the foundation? It's to espouse these principles that Desmond lives by. And, 6 of those are actually the of honor societies, with regards to courage, conviction, integrity. We have in kind. We have two that are somewhat different. Sacrifice, yes, one that will sacrifice and lay down their life for their brother. No greater love could be shown. We have what we call selflessness, not just sacrifice. How was he able to do these selfless acts? So those Edusodes are going to be interwoven, and we've got a story arc starting with courage, and with what he did on the battlefield to set the stage. The second one is conviction. Well, how was he so convicted to not hold a gun? And we go back 16 years like we do in storytelling when he was a youth to establish where those principles and how he held on to them. Then integrity, with all of the pressures that I mentioned before, trying to be drummed out of the Army, pretty difficult at times, but he held his convictions even under the potential of a court-martial. And humility, we have that in there because he was just the humblest of men. He didn't tout. But that's somewhat indicative of all Medal of Honor recipients. They just feel, the guilt of why am I still here, and all my buddies are with those white tombstones in our fields of cemeteries for our fallen, and the price that was.
Yeah, many survivors, whether they've been a gold medal recipient or not, that's a common theme for people who have fought for our country and survived while their best friends, their brothers and sisters next to them didn't.
So to wrap this up, the foundation with these Edusodes, education plus episode, we've coined the word Edusode and we've trademarked it. So it's the Desmond Doss Character Development Edusodes, and we are not just promoting, we are actually carrying forward these values with these Edusodes that are actually pretty unique in their design. Desmond's already a 2-day lesson plan in the Medal of Honor Society's booklet that has been around with 50 other men that are in there, and high school English classes and history classes use this book. So we didn't want to duplicate. We wanted, my thought was always to augment. Well, we've got 2 amazing films that we can augment by having it be an interactive experience. So what was released on Veterans Day, this last Veterans Day weekend, 10/11, was our first Edusode on courage. The structure of that is curriculum, voiceover with cards that engage the viewer to look at it, and then it's intercut with actually scenes from Hacksaw Ridge or the Conscientious Objector. To give you context, we had a couple of beta sites, high schools, for assembly programs, which are 45, 50 minutes in duration usually, respectively in New York and then in Colorado. After an hour and 15 minutes in one school and an hour and a half in the other, they had to bring it to a close because the kids were so engaged. So we believe we've hit the mark. While these Edusodes are totally interactive online, they can be ported into the classroom and a teacher can use it to go deeper, as we say, for a personal experience. And that's what happened in these first 2 beta site schools. So with that, our schedule is to have these 6 other Edusodes that finish up with humility, selflessness, faith, and patriotism by the summertime, and be ready for next school year, where we've got our 7 base Edusodes completely done that are interactive and geared towards youth for a moral compass, if I can say that again, to be upright citizens. But we are getting requests. Can we use this in book clubs? Can we use it in men's clubs? Can we have a leadership use the materials? So we're putting together a user guide of how you can use it. And I'll give you another little story that just happened this last weekend, but I'll get to that later.
Well, so DesmondDossFoundation.org, that's where you can find the trailer to the Edusodes, and then the first Edusode that you've completed. As you indicated, you're looking to complete the remaining 6, and each Edusode is around these principles we've talked about: integrity, conviction, selflessness, faith, patriotism, humility. Why do you think Why should people care?
Are we truly, and when I say truly, not just America, because this is a worldwide story. You know, whether Desmond was an Englishman or lived, he had these principles. How can we take care of our brethren? How can we treat each other with love and kindness and courtesy? But as Americans, we espouse ourselves as a democracy that takes care of everyone. We have our challenges with our our whole infrastructure, but at the core of it, are we going to do the right thing? Can we live by these right principles that he lived his life by? And we at the foundation believe these are important enough to have our organization represent this man's life in deep respect for the next generations, to live by these principles and love one another. And no matter how someone treats you, you will treat them with dignity and respect and not hostility.
Why do you think it's resonating so much with youth of America today?
I think there's a void with good mentors that live by their principles. I mean, we live we're so bombarded with our commercialism. You know, when I think back to our country and how we started and our founding forefathers, with the principles of putting together a society where we respect one another. And I think today, with what hit us with COVID 2 or 3 years ago, I was honored to be called to work on a television show, third season, Miracle Workers, with Daniel Radcliffe and Steve Buscemi. They said, "You're a registered nurse and a producer. Will you come and be our COVID compliance officer?" So I was able to put together a package and keep 400 people safe for a period of 6 months, which was a whole different bent of working in the industry. But from that experience, there was just this thirst that even in the workplace, we're telling stories, and we've got the ability to tell stories that impact people's lives. But there is this thirst of companionship, familiarity, community, which I think has been fragmented because of what was thrust upon us just in COVID alone. So I think people we at our core as human beings want to have companionship and friendship and, family. Your core is your family. I'm an Italian, blood is everything. But, I've lived my life where, finances for me, it's nothing more than something to do good for others. It's merely a vehicle for me to take care of those that I love and participate in programs that I believe in. And I think that's something that might have been lost in our society through the years, that is, what's in it for me? What can I get? We're a materialistic society. We try to give our life living arrangements where we're protected. And are we separated from one another because of all the pressures of society? And I think we all thirst for that warmth and companionship and friendship that's authentic. And that's what Desmond tried to do his whole life. So he made a huge impression on me, obviously. Here I am, like they say in Hollywood. What was it in The Godfather that Al Pacino said, every time I try to leave, they pull me back in? So Charles, the founder, asked me to be part of his foundation in 2019. And at that time I said, I'm honored to be a board member, but I really can't give of my commitment in time. So do you have an advisory board position? So I started on his advisory board. Then a year later became a full board member, presented to them some fundraising initiatives for a golf tournament. So I became chairman. And then Charles wanted to, 85, 86, he wanted to slow down a little. And so I became the vice president, and now I'm acting president. He is founder and president emeritus, but I'm acting president to, do a lot of the administrative stuff and keep things moving forward. So I guess you could say I found part of my ministry, part of my mission, because of the core values that Desmond lived by. I try to do that myself. And while this is a moral compass program that we've got geared towards youth, it's really, how about those of us who say we're mentors and coaches of youth? How about a rededication of who we are as citizens and leaders? So we've tried to look at this program broad spectrum. And on that note, let me share this. Dr. Dick Stembakken, I mentioned, full bird retired colonel, is a doctor of education. He's actually the chair of our educational committee, and he brought 2 gentlemen to help him with the writing of the curriculum. Another full bird retired colonel is Jonathan McGraw, with 4 master's degrees from ethics to organizational. And then the third gentleman is, he was a major in the Army. His name was Gus Lee, and he taught ethics at West Point for 18 years. So these men have taken and written the curriculum, if you will, that we've interlaced. And there's a gentleman by the name of Fred Knopper, who's been a producer director for 30 years, a lot in Christian ministry. But we have full rights from Cosmos Films to be able to use these film clips. And how we were able to do that, Gabe Videla, who was the executive producer of the documentary, when they were making Hacksaw Ridge, they wanted to use film clips from the documentary. So we have this unrestricted reciprocal use for and people who watch the film, which is out there on Netflix right now, where people can watch Hacksaw Ridge. At the end of it is actually film clips from the documentary, and some of that is Desmond's talking head. And so with that, we're in an amazing position to continue to carry forward Desmond's story by using these film clips interfaced with unbelievable substantive writing that give people context. It's interactive. It's not just, we're not throwing information. It's an interactive website where people can engage and go at their own pace, but yet a teacher can port it into the classroom and go deeper with the written materials that we have outlined for them.
Jeff, you've been very gracious with your time. Are there any closing thoughts you want to leave our audience with?
If you have the opportunity, go on our website, see the interviews that we have there from the director of the documentary. There's 4 or 5 other video film clips from the cast and crew that talk about the impact that Desmond had on their lives when they were making the story. And I guess my closing comment would be that if you take the time to familiarize yourself with this man's story, you might find yourself, the viewer, rededicating how you treat others with kindness and compassion and love, and extend yourself for their growth, not just trying to protect your own existence, because that's what Desmond did. It was always about what he could do for another person.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing Desmond's story, and we look forward to seeing the future Edusodes on DesmondDossFoundation.org. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Andrew, what an honor. Thank you for allowing me to be one of your guests.
Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing to and liking our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, and by following and liking the show on your favorite audio platforms. Be sure to connect with us on X, formerly Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. So you can interact with Andrew, the team, and our guests throughout the week. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.